remember when I took my first philosophy course. It was on Descartes, taught by my mentor at UCLA, Andrew Shue. The course focused on Descartes' argument for radical skepticism. Questions like, how do we know that we can trust our senses, especially when we've been wrong in the past, when we know that illusions are possible, right? How do we know that what we think we understand and claim to be true really is true, even when we were so certain that we were right, we sometimes turn out to be wrong, right? This was the course that got me hooked on philosophy. I mean, there's a lot of other things that kind of drew me into philosophy, but this was the initial kind of the impetus for switching and dedicating myself to philosophy. Of course, this level of skepticism seems in many ways silly. I remember my roommate at the time jokingly telling me that I'll be sure that I can trust my senses when he punches me in the face, right? The point he was making was that these skeptical questions are ridiculous because at the end of the day, we'll continue moving through life, right? Trusting our senses, believing that the world around us is as our senses present them to us, right? We can't do otherwise, right? So what's the point of asking, right? But I also think there's a good reason to slow down and take seriously the questions raised by even the most radical forms of skepticism. And I believe it's even more important in this day and age when we're bombarded by information and we need to be better critical thinkers about what it is that we're consuming and our justifications for believing whatever it is that we're consuming, right? The truth is that we often don't question what we believe, right? This might seem insane for some people who are like, no, I don't just believe whatever I hear. But let's be honest here, right? Take a step back, right? Many of our beliefs seem so obvious that you just don't see it as beliefs that you're holding. Like you never bother to ask what justification you have for them, right? Some things that kind of come to mind are things like the sun will rise tomorrow, or if you're in California, it's like it'll be a sunny day, right? It's like most days, or that it won't rain, right? It's like highly likely for it to be true, right? That I see the thing that I think I see in front of me, right? And again, unless you know that you're under the influence of something, you might think like, oh, I just take it for granted. I believe that I see whatever it is I think I see, right? Or that 2 + 2 = 4, right? Like basic arithmetic, because you've probably been doing it just on autopilot for so long. It's just something that you're not even aware that it's a belief that you hold. They're just that obvious. So you might be puzzled if I were to ask you, like, are you sure? Like, do you even have a reason for believing it? Right? Like if I sort of ask, you might actually think that I'm insane for even asking these questions, right? One way you can take this experience is to say that, look, some things are just settled. Some matters are just settled as true, and they are never to be disputed. That position is all well and good if there's a good reason for thinking that the matter is actually settled, and that we don't have to question it anymore. However, I think most of our beliefs are really not founded on anything. It's just something that we just believe implicitly, right? Like object permanence, when the brain developed the capacity to make sense of object permanence, they just started believing it, right? It's not as if somebody had to convince us to believe that object permanence is a real thing, right? Descartes' whole enterprise is built on recognizing that many of what we do believe are um, in fact believed to be settled matter, is actually not something that we've ever had a justification for, or at least any good justification for. Our reasons for believing seem to usually be based off of, I don't know what to call it, like vibes, off of repeated exposure, off of something else, but not justification. And that includes the beliefs that we do often take for granted, the things that we do assume are settled matter. So there are two good reasons then for us to take the skeptical argument seriously. For one, we benefit from slowing down and taking stock of what we believe and why we believe it, and then asking whether we are justified in those beliefs, whether we have good reason for holding on to those beliefs, right? Part of this exercise does shed light on the beliefs that we never bothered to question, which honestly should lead us to at least one, develop the proper foundations, proper justifications for believing what we believe, but also to assign the more accurate weight we should to the beliefs that we hold, right? So sometimes we tend to, believe with a little bit more certainty than maybe we should, right? Maybe some things are not as settled as we might think, that maybe, we should believe it with 70% certainty rather than 90% certainty, right? So we could probably, even if we end up holding the same beliefs, we at least adjust the kind of weight, the kind of certainty, the kind of, you know, you know, the how much you're willing to bet on it, type of weight that you would put on a specific belief. But it should also, at the end of the day, lead us probably to true beliefs, because you are actually asking the questions that should lead you to more accurate, more likely true beliefs, right? But the other reason for taking skeptical arguments seriously is that, and I think this is probably the more important thing, is that we develop some epistemic virtues going forward. And most importantly, I think it's going to be humility, right? Let me explain. I personally find it troubling that so many are focused primarily on being right, on the beliefs that they hold being true. I'm not saying that holding true beliefs is not important, but I think that we need to start placing higher priority on not necessarily on being right, on holding true beliefs, but rather the way we come to hold those beliefs, right? In other words, holding true beliefs, I think, needs to take a back seat to holding beliefs for the right reasons, right? Suppose, for instance, that I am correct that the Raiders win the football game next week, right? But suppose I believe that because, I don't know, I just had a feeling, or a black cat crossed my path, and black cats made me think of, like, the Raiders uniform, and that made me believe that the Raiders were going to win. Okay. Now, suppose that it's true, but it's probably not true of the, but let's just say it's true the week that I happen to believe this, right? So I hold a true belief, right? But how much value do you place on, that belief, that I like, the fact that I held a true belief? Probably not much. And the reason for it is because I might have come to a true belief, but the reason I came to that belief was pretty stupid. It was dumb, right? It actually says a lot about me that I would believe such a thing, for the reasons that I did. And I'm guessing you wouldn't trust any of my sports predictions if you knew this is how I came to my beliefs, right? Contrast that with the information that came out during the early days of the COVID pandemic. Some of the information presented to the public by Fauci, and the CDC and so on, it turned out to be incorrect, or maybe not as accurate as as they had hoped, or maybe there's some nuance here, right, where it was correct in some ways, but it wasn't as nuanced as it should have been, right? However, those beliefs were based on the limited information available and using good reasoning, grounded in all the additional prior knowledge that we have of infectious diseases and so on, right? Okay, so there was good reason to hold the beliefs that they did in the time that they did, even if it turned out to be wrong. And lo and behold, as more information became available, as they did more research on, the specific, the virus and all this, right? Using the, good methodology, solid critical thinking, they came to correct their beliefs, right? They came to adjust what they believed to be was true, right? The concerns raised, by skepticism is to push us into considering our relationship with the world and with truths about the world in some ways, forcing us to acknowledge our limitations, to acknowledge that we have limited information, and the best that we can actually do, because we can't guarantee that we'll hold true beliefs, the best we can do is to at least, form beliefs in the right kind of way. And this is what I mean by epistemic virtue, right? What I mean is that we need to develop the ability to engage with facts, with reality, and with the way that we uncover truths about the world in the right sort of way, to put us in the best position to come to not only more true beliefs more often than not, but also grounded in the right reasons, right? None of us have access to what is true. I think this is one of the big lessons for me, anyways, of, you know, exploring skepticism, is that the reality is that we know a lot less than we give ourselves credit for. There's no limits to human ego and thinking that they know, so much more than they actually do, right? We are building our knowledge base based off of incomplete evidence, but we do so in the best ways that we can, utilizing the best tools that we have. We utilize our senses, and when our senses are insufficient, we use various tools that are much more accurate. We also employ logic and math to ensure that we have solid justification and reasoning process. Um, we employ all these things to a limited degree to in our own imperfect sort of ways to get as close to the truth as possible. But again, the reality is that none of us have direct access to the truth. We are constantly searching for the truth through some medium, whether it's our sensory experience or whether it's the limited tools that we have, or, limited understanding, brain capacity, computers, whatever else, right? Acknowledging these limits are not a bad thing. Acknowledging these limits should push us to be much more creative and to, develop new ways of better understanding the world around us. More than anything, it should humble us to the vast universe around us and our limited place within it. We will be wrong most of the time. People don't want to hear it. It doesn't feel good, but that's the reality. We're going to be wrong most of the time. Instead of beating up ourselves over getting things wrong, right? Instead of focusing so much on whether or not we got the answer correct, I think we would find it to be a much more helpful process if we just focus on how we came to hold the false beliefs and sometimes even the true ones, and addressing the process. Because at the end of the day, fixing the process is what will lead us to correct beliefs more often than not. Skepticism, in some sense, is doing just that. It's pushing us to focus on the process, to focus on the justifications that we have for believing what we do, to weed out the beliefs that we hold that we have insufficient justification for, so that we're forced essentially into, identifying sufficient justifications, better justifications for the beliefs that we hold. So, as silly as it may sound to say out loud, let me ask you, why do you believe that the world around you is as your senses present them to you? Because I can tell you this, I've been wrong about a lot of things. And that includes what it is that I believe I saw. If you know anything about what we've learned about eyewitness testimony, you know this, that people's eyewitness testimony is often not very accurate. And that's because we often don't just take in what the world gives us. We, in some ways, create our world around us through our senses, through our perception, through memory, through our own desires and wishes. We project things onto the world. So maybe it's time for us to slow down and really reconsider exactly why it is we believe what we do. And maybe in that process, find a little more humility, not as a way of, denigrating ourselves, but rather as a way of, acknowledging that, this is going to be part of the process and that we all, hopefully, will all be the better for it.